In just 20 seconds, one of Hollywood's most respected actors completely dismantled a talk show host on live television, exposing hypocrisy so deep that the entire studio fell silent. What started as a conversation about representation in movies turned into an all-out war of words that ended with Samuel L. Jackson storming off the set while Bill Maher sat there speechless, his credibility shattered in front of millions. Before we dive into this explosive confrontation, make sure you subscribe to this channel. We bring you daily videos exposing Hollywood's darkest scandals, the confrontations they don't want you to see, and the moments that reveal who these celebrities really are behind the cameras. Last night on Real Time, Bill Maher welcomed Samuel L. Jackson to discuss the state of Hollywood and the film industry. The studio audience applauded as Jackson walked out, wearing his signature style, looking relaxed and ready for what seemed like it would be an interesting conversation. Maher greeted him with his usual smirk, that half smile he does when he thinks he's about to school someone with his opinions. "Sam, great to have you here," Maher said, leaning back in his chair like he owned the place. "You've been in this business for decades. You've seen it all. I want to talk to you about something that's been on my mind." Jackson nodded, settling into his seat. "Let's do it. So there's been all this talk about diversity in Hollywood, representation, all of that." Maher began, waving his hand dismissively. "And look, I get it, I understand the conversation. But don't you think at some point we've overcorrected? I mean, it feels like every movie now has to check certain boxes, and maybe, just maybe, we're sacrificing quality for quotas?" The audience made a collective sound, somewhere between a gasp and a murmur. Jackson's expression didn't change, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Overcorrected?" Jackson repeated slowly. "Bill, help me understand what you mean by that." "I mean, come on," Maher continued, clearly not reading the room. "There's pressure now to cast people based on their background rather than pure talent. And I know you're going to say representation matters, and it does. But at what cost?" Jackson let out a long breath through his nose. "At what cost? Let me tell you something, Bill. For 70 years, Hollywood cast people based on their background. They just happened to all look like you. Nobody called that checking boxes. Nobody said that was sacrificing quality. That was just called Tuesday." A few people in the audience clapped, but Maher raised his hand to quiet them. "That's not what I'm saying, Sam. Don't twist my words." "I'm not twisting anything," Jackson shot back, his voice getting louder. "You just asked me if we're sacrificing quality by including more people who don't look like you. Do you hear yourself?" Maher shifted in his seat, that smirk faltering for just a second. "I'm asking if merit should be the only thing that matters. Yes or no?" "Merit," Jackson said, almost laughing. "You want to talk about merit? How many mediocre actors got roles for decades because they knew somebody, because they looked the part, because they fit what Hollywood decided a leading man should look like? And now, when the door opens a crack for other people, suddenly everyone's worried about merit?" The tension in the studio was thick enough to cut. The cameras were locked on both men, capturing every second of this increasingly heated exchange. Maher tried to regain control of the conversation. "Look, all I'm saying is that the best person should get the job, regardless of..." "Regardless of what?" Jackson interrupted, his voice sharp as a blade. "Finish that sentence, Bill. Regardless of what?" Maher paused, realizing he'd walked into something. "Regardless of any external factors. It should be about talent alone." "But it never was," Jackson said, pointing at him. "That's what you're not getting. It was never about talent alone. It was about who had access, who got opportunities, who got to walk through doors that were locked for everybody else. And now that more people are getting through those doors, you want to pretend like suddenly we care about fairness? Miss me with that." Maher's face was getting red now. You could see he wasn't used to being challenged like this on his own show. "I think you're being unfair to what I'm saying." "Unfair?" Jackson's eyebrows shot up. "You want to talk about unfair? Let me tell you about unfair, Bill. Unfair is being told you're not right for a part because of how you look, even though you can act circles around everyone else in the room. Unfair is watching people with half your talent get opportunities you had to fight for. Unfair is being in this industry for decades and still having to explain to people like you why representation actually matters." The audience was completely silent now. This wasn't the playful back and forth that usually happened on these shows. This was real, raw anger bubbling to the surface. Maher tried to laugh it off. Okay, you're getting a little heated here. Can we just have a rational conversation? Don't do that, Jackson said, his voice deadly serious. Don't tell me I'm getting heated like that. Dismisses what I'm saying. My points are rational. You just don't like hearing them. I invited you on this show to have a dialogue, Maher said, his tone getting defensive. Not to be lectured. Then maybe you should have thought about your questions before you asked them, Jackson fired back. You can't ask ignorant questions and then get upset when someone gives you real answers. The word ignorant hung in the air like a bomb. Maher's face went from red to almost purple. He sat up straight, pointing his finger at Jackson. Now hold on a second. I am not ignorant. I've been talking about social issues on this show for 20 years. I've probably done more for progressive causes than most people in Hollywood. Jackson actually laughed at that, but there was no humor in it. Oh, here we go. The "I'm one of the good ones" speech. Bill, doing the bare minimum doesn't make you special. Having a platform and talking about issues doesn't mean you understand them. I understand them better than you think, Maher snapped back. No, you don't, Jackson said firmly. Because if you did, you wouldn't have asked that dumb question about overcorrecting. You wouldn't act like giving other people opportunities take something away from you. Maher stood up now, which was unusual for him. He rarely got up during interviews. You know what? I don't think you came here to have a conversation. I think you came here to grandstand. Jackson stood up too, and he was taller than Maher, more imposing. Grandstand? I came here because your people called my people and asked me to be on the show. You asked the question, I answered it. You just don't like the answer. I don't like being called ignorant on my own show, Maher said, his voice rising. Then stop saying ignorant things. Jackson shot back without missing a beat. The audience gasped. This was completely off the rails now. The producers were probably panicking in the control room, trying to figure out whether to cut to commercial or let this play out. Maher pointed toward the exit. Maybe you should leave if you're just going to insult me. Insult you? Jackson said incredulously. Bill, you insulted an entire community of people with your question and you don't even see it. That's the problem. You think your opinions are just neutral observations. But they're not. They're loaded with assumptions and biases that you've never had to examine because you've never had to. I have examined them, Maher insisted. I think about this stuff all the time. Thinking about it and understanding it are two different things, Jackson said. You think about it from your perspective, from your comfortable seat where you've never been denied anything because of how you look. You've never been told you're too much or not enough. You've never had to be twice as good to get half as far. So yeah, when someone like me gets a seat at the table, it might look like special treatment to you. But it's really just trying to balance out decades of actual special treatment that people like you got without even noticing. Maher was pacing now, clearly flustered. So what? I'm supposed to just accept that I'm the bad guy because I'm asking questions. You're the bad guy because you're asking the wrong damn questions and acting like everyone else is the problem when they call you out on it, Jackson said, his voice booming through the studio. You hide behind just asking questions, like that makes it okay. But your questions reveal what you really think. And what you really think is that things were fine the way they were. That's not true, Maher protested. Then why are you so concerned about overcorrection? Jackson challenged. Why is your first instinct to worry that we're going too far in fixing a system that was broken for decades? Why aren't you asking how we can do better? How we can make sure everyone gets a fair shot? Instead, you're worried about quotas and quality, like those things can't exist together. Maher ran his hand through his hair, a nervous gesture. Because I believe in meritocracy. Jackson actually laughed out loud at that. Meritocracy. Bill, there has never been a meritocracy in Hollywood. Never. It's always been about who you know, who you look like, who you remind people of. Always. The only difference now is that more people are getting a chance to play the game, and you're calling that unfair. I'm not, Maher started, but Jackson cut him off. Yes, you are. That's exactly what you're doing. You're sitting here, on your platform, questioning whether diversity is worth it. Do you know how that sounds? Do you know what message that sends? Maher's jaw clenched. I'm allowed to ask questions, And I'm allowed to tell you when your questions are bullshit, Jackson said, not backing down an inch. Free speech goes both ways, Bill. You can ask whatever you want, and I can tell you exactly what I think about it. The studio was electric with tension. Every camera operator, every audience member, every person in that room could feel that this had gone way past a normal interview disagreement. This was personal now. Maher tried a different approach, softening his voice. Look, Sam, I respect you. I respect your work. I just think we disagree on this issue. We don't disagree, Jackson said flatly. You're just wrong. And the fact that you can't see that you can't understand why your question was problematic from the jump, that's the issue. You think disagreement means both sides have valid points. Sometimes one side is just wrong. That set Maher off again. So now I'm just wrong? There's no room for nuance, no room for debate? Not about whether people deserve opportunities, no, Jackson said firmly. That's not up for debate. The fact that you think it is tells me everything I need to know. This is ridiculous, Maher muttered, shaking his head. I can't even have a conversation without being told I'm some kind of villain. Nobody called you a villain, Jackson corrected him. But you're so focused on defending yourself that you're not hearing anything I'm actually saying. That's your problem, Bill. You're more concerned with being right than being better. Maher spun around to face him. I am trying to be better. That's why I ask these questions. No, you're asking these questions because deep down, you're uncomfortable with change, Jackson said, his voice steady and strong. You're uncomfortable with the idea that maybe, just maybe, you benefited from a system that kept other people out. And instead of sitting with that discomfort, instead of learning from it, you're questioning whether fixing that system is even a good idea. That is not what I'm doing, Maher said through gritted teeth. Then what are you doing? Jackson challenged. Seriously, Bill, explain to me what you're doing right now. Because from where I'm standing, you invited me on your show, asked me a loaded question about overcorrection in diversity, and now you're mad that I'm giving you a real answer instead of playing along with your narrative. Maher pointed at him again. I'm trying to have an honest conversation about a complicated issue. It's only complicated because you're making it complicated, Jackson said. It's actually pretty simple. For a long time, a lot of people got shut out of opportunities. Now, we're trying to fix that. Some people like you see that as going too far. People like me see it as barely scratching the surface. That's not complicated. That's just you being on the wrong side. The audience was starting to react more now, some people nodding along with Jackson, others looking uncomfortable. Maher noticed, and it seemed to make him even angrier. You don't get to decide what side is right, Maher said. History will, Jackson replied. And something tells me it's not going to be kind to people who spent their time worrying about whether we were being too fair. Maher laughed bitterly. Wow, okay, so I'm going to be on the wrong side of history because I asked a question. Because you asked the wrong question, and then defended it instead of learning from it, Jackson clarified. There's a difference. I don't need to learn from you, Maher said, and immediately, you could see he regretted it. The words came out harsher than he probably intended. Jackson tilted his head, his expression hardening. Excuse me? I just mean... Maher tried to backtrack, but Jackson raised his hand. Nah, you said it. Say what you mean, Bill. You don't need to learn from me. Is that because you think you already know everything? Or is it because you don't think I have anything to teach you? Maher's mouth opened and closed. He was trapped, and he knew it. That's not what I meant. Then, what did you mean? Jackson pressed. Because it sure sounded like you were dismissing everything I've been saying because you can't handle being challenged. I can handle being challenged, Maher insisted. I do it every week on this show. No. You handle people disagreeing with you when you're in control of the conversation, Jackson said. This is different. This is someone telling you that you're wrong and you're not right, and you can't handle it. Maher's face was burning red now. You're being incredibly disrespectful. Disrespectful? Jackson's voice rose. Bill, you started this conversation by basically saying that diversity in Hollywood is going too far, and you're talking to me about disrespect? Do you not see the irony in that? I never said diversity was going too far, Maher said, raising his voice to match Jackson's volume. You said we overcorrected, Jackson shouted back. That's the same thing. Overcorrected means we went too far. How are you going to say those words and then claim you didn't mean it? Because you're taking it out of context, Maher argued. There is no context that makes that question okay, Jackson said, his voice filled with frustration. None. You can't ask if we've done too much to include people who were excluded and then act surprised when someone calls you out on it. The energy in the room was chaotic now. The audience didn't know whether to applaud or stay silent. Some people were pulling out their phones, recording this exchange that was going completely viral before it even finished. Maher tried to regain some authority. Okay, I think we need to calm down here. Don't tell me to calm down, Jackson said sharply. I am calm. I'm just tired of this conversation. I'm tired of having to explain to people why everyone deserves a fair shot. I'm tired of being asked to justify why representation matters. I'm tired of people like you acting like progress is a problem. I never said progress was a problem, Maher said defensively. But you questioned it, Jackson countered. That's almost worse. At least if you said you were against it, you'd be honest. But this thing where you pretend to support progress but then question every step forward, that's cowardly, man. That sitting on the fence and acting like that makes you reasonable when really it just makes you complicit. Maher's eyes widened. Complicit? Are you seriously? Yes, I'm seriously, Jackson interrupted. When you have a platform like this and you use it to question whether we're doing too much to fix inequality, you're helping maintain that inequality. Even if you don't mean to, that's what you're doing. That is not fair, Maher said, his voice shaking with anger now. Fair? Jackson laughed, but there was pain in it. Bill, nothing about this has been fair. That's the point. That's what I've been trying to tell you. But you're so caught up in defending your right to ask questions that you're not listening to the answers. Maher stepped closer to Jackson, getting in his space. I've listened to every word you've said. I just don't agree with your conclusion. Because your conclusion is wrong, Jackson said, not backing away. And I'm done trying to explain it to you. So that's it? Maher said. You're just going to shut down the conversation? There's no conversation to shut down, Jackson said, spreading his arms wide. You're not interested in conversation. You're interested in defending yourself and your perspective. You haven't heard a single thing I've said. You've just been waiting for your turn to talk again. That's not true, Maher protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Bill, you asked me if we've overcorrected on diversity, Jackson said slowly, like he was explaining to a child. I told you why that question is wrong. I explained the history, the context, the reality of what people have faced and continue to face, and your response has been to defend the question, to argue with me, to act like I'm being unfair to you. You haven't once stopped to consider that maybe, just maybe, I know what I'm talking about because I've lived it. Maher opened his mouth to respond, but Jackson wasn't done. You've spent this entire conversation trying to prove you're not wrong instead of trying to understand why I'm right. That's not dialogue, Bill. That's you performing for your audience, hoping they'll think you're the reasonable one. This is my show, Maher said, his voice low and dangerous. You're a guest here. And that's the problem, Jackson said, matching his tone. You think because it's your show, you can't be wrong. You think your platform gives you authority. But it doesn't. It just gives you a microphone. And right now, you're using that microphone to say things that are harmful, whether you realize it or not. Maher's hands were shaking. I think we're done here. Yeah, Jackson said, nodding slowly. I think we are. I mean, I think you should leave, Maher clarified, his voice cold. Jackson stared at him for a long moment. The entire studio was holding its breath. Then Jackson smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who had just proven their point. There it is, Jackson said quietly. When you can't win the argument, you kick out the person who's beating you. Classic move, Bill. Real mature. You're being unreasonable, Maher said. No, I'm being honest, Jackson corrected. And you can't handle it. So instead of admitting that maybe you asked a bad question, maybe you have some things to learn, you're going to make me the problem. You're going to tell everyone watching that I was too aggressive, too angry, too unwilling to have a civil conversation. And that way, you don't have to face the fact that you were wrong. I asked you to leave, Maher repeated, his voice shaking. Jackson looked at him with something like pity. You know what the sad part is, Bill? You actually think you're one of the good guys. You think because you talk about social issues and have liberal guests that you're on the right side. But when it comes down to it, when someone challenges you for real, you show who you really are. Get off my stage, Maher said, pointing toward the exit. Jackson looked out at the audience, many of whom were watching with wide eyes and open mouths. Then he looked back at Maher. I'll leave, Jackson said. But not because you're kicking me off. I'm leaving because there's no point in talking to someone who doesn't want to listen. You had a chance here, Bill. You could have learned something. You could have had a real conversation. Instead, you chose your ego. He started walking toward the exit, his footsteps echoing in the silent studio. Maher called after him. That's right, walk away. Just like Jackson spun around, cutting him off. Don't say another word. You've said enough. You've shown everyone exactly who you are. Let that speak for itself. Maher stood there, his face red, his hands in fists at his sides. The audience didn't know how to react. A few people started to clap nervously, but it died out quickly. Jackson shook his head one more time. Overcorrected, he muttered, almost to himself. Man, you really don't get it. He walked through the studio doors, leaving Maher standing alone on his own stage, surrounded by cameras and an audience that had just witnessed something they would never forget. The silence was deafening. Maher tried to compose himself, running his hands through his hair again. He looked at the cameras, then at his audience, trying to find words that would salvage this moment, but there were no words. Jackson had dismantled him completely, exposed every defensive, privileged reaction for what it was. Someone in the audience coughed, breaking the silence. Maher forced a laugh that sounded hollow and fake. Well, he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice was tight. That was something. But nobody was buying it. The damage was done. As Jackson disappeared through those studio doors, he left behind a host who had just learned the hard way that asking the wrong questions gets you the right answers, even if you don't want to hear them.